everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Sparks, Entertainment and Art. I am Monte Mallon. I am your host, and we are chugging along. We've had a lot of great guests, a lot more are on the way, and today we are talking to Andy Moore, who is the host of a podcast called Andy's Treasure Trove. And he did an entire episode, I think it was about 2 hours long, on Sparks. It was really an in-depth look. But more than that, he's from California. He grew up in a similar climate that they did. And he's just a fan for a long, long time. And I am really happy to have him with me today. So with that, Andy, let me welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much, Monty. It's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed your show so far.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being someone who will contribute to it. And with that, let's dive right in. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the show and that you do, but also tell us how you came onto Sparks, how you discovered them, and why they mean so much to you.
Sure. Big questions. Before we went on the air, you and I were talking about the Beatles, and I listened to the Beatles a lot growing up. And when I was 15 and I got my first pair of stereo headphones, I really got deep into all the different parts and arrangements and the lyrics. And, I'd sit with a book of lyrics in front of me and listen very carefully. And that suited me well for quite a while. And I listened to other bands too, but the Beatles were kind of the mainstay for me. And when I was 18 in college, a freshman at UC San Diego, I was listening to a Los Angeles radio station who I didn't even know what they were playing because I was cruising around the dial and I landed there and I heard Russell singing This Town. And like so many other people who've told a similar story, I did a little mental double take and, I didn't know if it was a man or a woman, sounded British. Wasn't really sure, but there were a lot of hooks and I was really hooked in. And it turned out, I think that this was a in studio recording they did that was broadcast over a radio station in Los Angeles that I could get down in San Diego. And I went to the record store right away, Tower Records in San Diego. But when I went to the record store, they didn't have Kimono. So all I had was Woofer. And I fell in love with that album. As for growing up in LA and the climate, literally and figuratively, I would wager that both the physical climate, that is a lot of sunshine, not a whole lot of rain, this much snow once every decade or something, was influential to everyone who lived in that climate. Now, as for the other climate, well, that's show business because LA has movies and TV mostly, and everyone from that world cycles through LA. And I grew up with many neighbors who their parents were bit actors in TV shows or technicians, and I would imagine. See, I was brought up in the San Fernando Valley, which is a suburb of LA, and it's just over the Santa Monica Mountain from where Ron and Russell grew up. Mm-hmm. Also, they were two brothers, and I had an older sister, but she and I didn't do a lot of adventuresome things together. We did some, but we didn't do a lot of adventuresome things together. And I can imagine if I had an older brother, especially an older brother like Ron, they were so into showbiz that they went to all these shows, all these rock shows. We've seen them. We've picked them out in the audiences. And they, of course, went to the Hollywood Bowl to see the Beatles. I never went to the Hollywood Bowl until I saw Sparks there last year. Cool. My family just wasn't as outgoing. And I was at a certain age, let's say I was 13. Well, there was a huge rock concert just up the street from me at Devonshire Downs, and it had all the big stars at the time. I had no idea. I just didn't know. I just wasn't plugged into that. But I think Ron and Russell were, and they were really swept up in the show business world and the art world because they like foreign films and they have very discriminating taste and they're very adventurous. So I would imagine for them, LA had all the benefits of a comfortable climate, but all sorts of cultural riches everywhere you look. I mean, like I said, every neighborhood had somebody who worked in the industry in it, or dozens and dozens, or hundreds and hundreds. So I think, and the fact that their father worked for a movie industry publication prompted them to take advantage of that more than I did. I mean, I have my encounters with movie stars and stories and so forth, but I think they were really more adventuresome that way. And so they were able to see the Beatles. I mean, I didn't even know they were there, and their mother drove them to see them. So I think the physical climate of LA, as well as the cultural climate, I can imagine those things enriching their lives and sparking their creativity.
And they were film students.
And they were film students, just
Yeah.
like me.
So they had that. That's true. That's true. I read that in your biography. Uh, but they have that cinematic quality to a lot of their music, and in addition to that, you hear the constant references, to the extent that they even had a song about Mickey Mouse. But beyond that, just constantly making references to Hollywood and certain tropes that you would see in movies and things.
Yeah, and in fact, and Russell even speaks in what you call a mid-Atlantic, not a mid-Atlantic coast, but mid-Atlantic between England and the U.S., a mid-Atlantic voice, the kind of voice that and diction that movie stars would use in the 30s and 40s. It almost sounds British. It's not quite, but the R's are pronounced differently. So British people don't think that Russell sounds British at all. But if you're from LA like I am, he does,
Well,
and
let's
sometimes he
pull on
breaks
that string
character.
just a little bit, because that's
Sure.
one of the amazing things, to my ears, is he just went there and he sounded like he was British, and you heard that in the music. But then you hear interviews with him, and he still sounded like he was British.
Oh, really?
And I
Hmm.
just thought it was kind of like not always, but sometimes it just seemed like a little bit of a put on. But you're saying that there's another way to look at it.
Yes, I guess I am. I know. I think you're right that when he was talking on stage, he affected a British accent too in those early days in Britain. But now I'm just talking about the singing voice, and
Yeah.
he'll sometimes revert to his natural LA voice. Um, uh, Hello down there. This is your creator with a questionnaire, and then he says, "Hello up there," without the affect that he did, and he does that a lot.
But you think there's a regional influence, a kind of a conscious choice to put on a mid-Atlantic, as you called it, voice.
I don't know how conscious it is. I mean, a lot of rock singers don't pronounce their R's. Bugs the hell out of me sometimes, but it seems to be a holdover from the British invasion, or just now a self-fulfilling convention. Um, and Russell does it a lot, and that's one of the reasons why it's hard to understand him, or at least if you don't have the lyric sheets, you can strain a little bit to understand him.
It can be very hard to understand them. I think also Ron used to like to cram a lot of words in those days.
Oh yeah, well,
Yeah,
still, I guess. But
yeah,
I think just as an aside, I think that's one of the reasons they weren't as popular as they could have been is Russell's voice. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's very high, it's very fast, it has a certain pronunciation, and it's just not as easily accessible as somebody in country rock or
yeah. No, well,
some other genre.
yeah. One of the things that Ira Robbins said is that they never changed. They never went out of their way to put on a more to be more poppy. To be more popular. They just stuck with who they were.
Well, they're poppy in quotations. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that they consider themselves a pop band.
yeah.
We might say art rock or all the other different tags you could apply, but um, I think that they were clearly influenced by pop music, and that's another thing about LA. Uh, a lot of TV, a lot of jingles, a lot of music going on. Um, I just think that it was part of the jangly culture of LA that they tapped into.
No, no question about it. And I just want to continue to hear some of your thoughts on the cinematic aspects. Because if you listen to some of their music, like let's just an easy one is on the newest album, the Drive song. Um, it's
Take
on.
me for a ride.
Yes, Take Me for a Ride. I mean, that's a movie. That's a film noir movie being played out, in front as you listen.
Well, from the very beginning, every time I would listen to Sparks music or Beatles music, I would I would I would see a scenario. I would make a movie in my head, partly because I'm a filmmaker. And I think,
Mhm.
oh, if I was gonna, oh, I can think of a great movie that would go with this song. So, they're obviously filled with different characters. It's not all one person, one voice. Johnny was a soldier who wanted to stay in 1918, and name some other character that's totally different.
Oh, there's a ton of them. Every one of their songs
Yeah.
is populated with these characters who could be movies. They could, yeah, sometimes it's like you said, a simple song like that, and sometimes it's as I sit down to play the organ, off of Hello Young Lovers, which is an entire cinema experience
Hmm.
being played out in a song.
Yeah.
You hear
So
that? Yeah, please,
you hear, I mean, you see it too in your mind's eye. At least I do.
definitely. What is it about Sparks that you single them out as a band that you want to think about all these years, and then even go ahead even take the next step and do a 2-hour podcast on them?
Like many Sparks fans, especially from the beginning, I didn't know at first any other. And then through the decades, I didn't know many other Sparks fans. And I was always trying to turn people on to Sparks. I'd give them mixtapes,
Of
play
course.
them music, quote lyrics to them, etc. Um, when I decided in around 2008 that I was going to be a podcaster, it was around the same time that I realized that my greatest wealth was my friends. I have hundreds of friends, and many of them are artists, writers, filmmakers, etc. And I thought, if I just interview my friends, this is going to be rich. Uh, in addition to my friends, there are people I really admire a lot. I could seek them out as a podcaster versus a fan, and I can interview them and I can share them with the world. And so my podcast is a legacy podcast, a podcast that altogether is sort of forms a portrait of me. More importantly, it promotes things and people and ideas that I'm interested in and that I
Mhm.
think other people should be too. So I had a chance to, put my favorite Sparks songs and lyrics. I read reviews, I read lyrics aloud. Um, I also quoted from a bunch of musical magazines of the time. Another layer was that I was gonna say, when this Sparks song came out, this was at the top of the pops, or the top 40, just to keep comparing how, yes, we're all aware of what the Stones did and so forth, but right in there and right in that spot, there was this totally different thing. So I didn't end up doing that because, as you say, it was over 2 hours. I think it was 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I didn't expect it to be comprehensive. But I went ahead and made comments about every album, and a couple of them that I hadn't bought or listened to during that period. I wasn't listening to Sparks. I just said I didn't like this album, so I didn't buy it. Um, I also later say that I now am uh, unconditionally love every Sparks album, even if I don't listen to it, because it's part of a body of work that is incredibly rich and quality. I would say the thing that drew me to Sparks and that consistently brings me back to Sparks is the high quality of the melodies, the arrangements, the lyrics. It's just really high quality stuff. There's unusual instrumentation. I know there was that Ron's list of the 10 things to jam-proof your compositions. A few of those things, like using unusual notes. I'm not a musician, but like instead of a C flat, it's a C diminished or something or whatever.
Excuse me.
I don't really understand it scientifically, but I think it flavors things in a way that sounds pretty novel in my head.
Well, you said something really interesting there, and I want to talk a little bit more about the podcast and about the incredible interview that you did with Ron and Russell. I mean, that was really primo stuff there. But you
Spoiler
said,
alert.
yes, spoiler alert. But you said something that, well, the guests you had. Okay, let's stick with this for a second. You had people like Tosh Berman. You had people who looked at it from operatic or classical music perspective. They each added something very enriching to the story, I thought.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I that's what I want. That's one of the things I wanted to do to legitimize or make more attractive or give people permission that it's not just me. It's, a guy who's written several books about them, two books, I guess, and who thinks a lot about pop culture in an interesting way. The leader of the Mill Valley Philharmonic Orchestra is a friend of mine, and
That was
she
great when you played her the Spark songs and had her comment on them.
Yeah, thanks. And then my other guest was a friend, another filmmaker, artist friend in San Francisco who, a little younger than I am. He started listening in high school. And like I said, I was in college before I heard them. But he's very articulate and a musician himself too. And so I really enjoyed talking to him about Sparks. Yeah, I flew to LA to interview Tosh Berman.
Oh, that's great. Well, he said all the things that I think about, or a lot of the things that I think about, but 1,000 times better than I would be able to say them.
He's very articulate.
Yeah, he was
And
great.
he talked, I remember, a lot about the Sparks world. It's not just music,
Right.
it's, the pictures on the albums and the styles they wear. And it's a whole package, it's a whole culture. And he likes bands
Yeah.
like that.
Well, there is, and that really gets to something else you started to allude to a minute, which fascinates me. You said that, every album, maybe it has, you didn't, I'm characterizing a little bit, but you said that every album, you might like some more than others, but they're all part of this larger body of work. And that's what's motivating me to do this show in a lot of ways is that, after 26, 27 albums, whatever it is, there's a pretty large body of work that they've done, which is,
Oh, yeah.
I think, as you put it, really high quality. And it's fascinating to me. I want to, that's what I'm hoping to explore a little bit on this show.
Yeah, I think the fact that I mean, I think that they're relatively uncompromising, especially now that they're more independent than they ever have been, recording at home and everything. Um, I just think that they've been courageous. It's a combination of courage and a hard work ethic. Um, I don't know. I've never heard of any bands that come into the office, the recording studio every day, 6 days a week, whether they sit there and talk about things or whether Ron's writing and Russell is producing or singing. Um, that's their job. And the fact that they can probably read each other's minds or somehow do a mind meld to collaborate, it's just it's just turned out to be a wonderful recipe.
Yeah.
I really admire them. I've never met them, despite the fact that I do have part one of my interview with them on my podcast. I've never met them in person, and I've been with them in person. I mean, about me suddenly getting invited into the dressing room
No, I do not. You'll have
at
to
the
tell us
Santa
that.
Monica Civic. Well,
Okay.
went to my first rock concert at Sparks at Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, and I brought my best friend at the time's little sister because she was also a Sparks fan, and they played 2 nights in a row, and we went both nights. And the first night after the concert, we went out and stood around where they were going to come out. And they came out and they got into a limo and they sped away. And I wanted to impress this little girl and I wanted her to get an autograph. So I said, "Come on." And I jumped in my Ford Pinto, and I and another 4 or 5 cars followed the limo. And that limo was a demon on the we jumped on the freeway and off the freeway and on and around and he lost everybody except me. And they pulled into the hotel. I said, "There they go get an autograph." And she was like frozen in her seat. And I said, "Go, go, go." And she ran and got their autograph as they were going in their hotel on Sunset. So the next evening, I didn't want to chase him again. I thought that was really reckless, actually. But I'm a good driver. And the second night, we were out there just waiting for them, and some guy in a suit comes out of the stage door, walks through the crowd, peels a backstage pass off of his sports coat, and sticks it on me as he's passing. And I had to like, "What's that?" And so I said, "We have a backstage pass. Let's go." And so we went in and we found our way to the dressing room, and it was crowded with all their friends. Russell was in the center of the room in a chair, and everybody was crowding around him. We just stood up against the wall because we were scared. We knew we didn't belong there, and it was just so weird to suddenly be there. And Ron walked right and stood in front of me to the applause of his friends as he entered the room. So I was this close to Ron Mail for a good 3 moments.
What year was that? About 1974, 1975?
I believe 75. Yeah,
75.
first heard them in 74, first saw them in 75.
Yeah, well,
I've seen them about 15 times.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, yeah. Did you see the Two Hands One Mouth tour?
I did.
Yeah,
I really loved that.
I did too. I
Yeah.
did too. It amazes me that that was completely left out of the movie.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah,
There's so many things, just like when you're making a long podcast about them, you want to include everything, but
Yeah.
then you have to chip away. You have to pare down.
I
Well,
just thought that I feel that the Two Hands One Mouth was really special in that it was really them pared down. This is the essence of their music, and I thought that was really great.
and the album is beautiful. It's just
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's a nice
They
album.
answered them.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the
So
reasons I
what do
did
you?
this podcast was to educate anybody who had listened about Sparks.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to learn about Sparks, listen to this. Another thing was I was hoping they would hear it and that they would,
Right.
say, "Thanks a lot, Andy." But whatever.
Well, I'm sure that now that their tour is over, I'm sure they're catching up on their correspondence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. When they are done, what do you think their legacy will be?
Well, now that we have the documentary and a little bump in the public's awareness, that's good for the legacy. The thing is, how are they going to handle their copyrights? I have a very good friend who wrote music and made it all public domain before he dies. That means anybody can put on a play based on that music, or a concert, or use it on a film soundtrack or whatever. It reminds me of the number one song in heaven. It becomes the voice of children singing. It goes out, and anybody can do anything with it without fear of legal repercussions. Now that means nobody's going to get any money. And my friend who's doing this doesn't have relatives. Nobody's going to, he doesn't have obvious people to leave any potential money from future royalties there. So he's just making it public domain. And I think if Sparks, if not all their music, if they did that with some of their songs, it could really enhance their legacy just by opening it up for other people to use their music. And barring that, I still see their music being applied to other media, like stage musicals or various movies. We've talked about how cinematic their music is. So uh, I could see it being utilized if it wasn't too tightly controlled.
Mhm.
And as far as them personally and their association with it, I don't know if it was an FFS song that I think maybe Ron wrote, and there was a lyric about it, your legend being more important than your life.
Mhm.
Something about they care more for their legend than their life.
Mhm.
And so I get the impression that they do want to leave enough material for legend. And whether that means between now and the end, there'll be another film. I heard you tell your last guest that you wish that there would be a different film, and I'm right with you there.
I
Uh,
love the film. I think there's another one, another
right.
story to be told.
And I don't know if they want to tell that story. For example,
Yeah,
Ron, how do you write music? How do you write your songs?
right.
That's their whole one of their whole shticks is mystery, and uh, that can be frustrating, but it's also a very sound approach for an artist, I think.
Yeah, but you're making a great point, which is that if they open the veil a little bit, let people use the music and hear it, understand the motivation behind it from their perspective, their thoughts on their career, that would be a fascinating story.
Maybe Ron is
They would
writing a
want to tell
book.
it.
Maybe
What's that?
Ron is writing. Maybe Ron is writing a book in his spare time,
Nothing would surprise me.
or journals, or something that will,
Yeah.
provide material for future reflection on them.
Well, consistent with our conversation, they're really getting immersed in film.
Yeah, um, I liked Annette a lot.
I
I
did too.
mean, it's not the kind of film I would usually select, and I can be very critical of certain elements and certain shots. I think some of the cameos are just going a little too far, like them being the pilot and co-pilot and turning around. To me, that was a little schmaltzy.
Yeah.
But I'm tickled pink that they got an award at Cannes and that they are now professional filmmakers.
I'm very happy for them enjoying their success. And what you're saying is that if they, open the aperture a little bit, then they might even get more appreciation. And hopefully we'll have you back to talk about the last album a little bit, because I think there's a lot there, and I think they talk a lot about their legacy on that album, and I think there's a lot to really listen to on that last one.
Hmm.
And I sometimes get in the habit of saying I think it's one of their best. I've
Hmm.
learned personally not to do that. I don't like to do that, but I will say for me personally, it's one of the most meaningful, and I think it's one of for me, it's one of their best for me,
Hmm.
but they're all so good. So who's to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, I delight in the fact that some people's favorite album is my least favorite album, and same
Me
with
too.
songs. And so it's quality will out. I mean, you have different tastes, but you're attracted to the quality of the whole package.
I still am amazed that John Ashdown thinks Pulling Rabbits is one of the best albums they have. But I think it's great. I think it's
Uh-huh.
great. But to me, it's just that to me is amazing. So that's wonderful. All right, Andy, this was really great. Anything you want to add, or shall we call
Yeah,
it?
I don't create new podcast episodes very often. Sometimes just one or two a year, but I have got 26 or so of them, and I think people will enjoy them. You don't have to listen to all of them, but just look at the people I'm talking to and see if there's anybody you're interested in hearing interviewed.
Well, the podcast is great. It's unique because of its depth. It's not just a half an hour thing, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for doing it. Thank you for doing this show. It was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you
And
very much for having me.
absolutely. And thank you again. And let me just turn to everybody who is watching and say that I appreciate it. And I love the fact that I can bring these conversations to you. And it's just wonderful to have a guest like Andy Moore. So thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. I will see you soon with a brand new episode. Don't forget, we have a Gmail address. Don't forget to subscribe. That really helps with the algorithms. More than you might think is what I'm learning now that I'm in YouTube world. But thank you, everyone. I will see you soon with a brand new episode. This is Monte, signing off.